Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Collins and I'm an ethical production consultant. I work with brands in all things sourcing suppliers, understanding the supply chain and anything to do with product manufacturing. And this is Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I run the brand My Carriad, and Sarah helped me find my ethical manufacturers.
So today we just want to talk about how important it is to find suppliers that are right for your business, not just matching a supplier and a brand together and thinking it will work. We really want to put time into making sure the relationships are right, the ethics and the sustainable practices are all in place. And Emma and I, like she said, have worked together as she was starting her brand, My Carriad. And I think it's really good to have Emma's insights as a brand owner and mine as an ethical production consultant. So what do we mean by ethical? Ethical fashion is garment design, production and distribution that focuses on reducing harm to people and planet. In the most ideal sense, it benefits those working along the supply chain and creates a better future for everyone, not just those at the top. So I always like to start with just highlighting what we mean by ethical when we talk about product manufacturing and fashion manufacturing. And I know it was really important for you when you were starting the brand that things were ethical, and it can be subjective, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's also quite hard to know. You can find people say they're ethical, but then if you dig deeper, it's not always the truth. So it was really important for me to have someone working with me who knew exactly what to look for and the questions to ask to get those right answers.
Yeah, so just a little bit about my background as well. I come from a fair trade background, so I really started working with manufacturing with fair trade producers in 2010. So I've been working in all different types of manufacturing since then. So the ethics have been key of what I've been doing since I began. And we know that ethics and sustainability are key topics in the industry, and that's not going anywhere, thankfully. But I think it's really important to highlight the stats in what consumers are doing as well. We know that consumer behavior is changing to really want to know who the suppliers are or where the products are made, who made them, and really digging deep rather than that surface level ethical and sustainable production. And I guess, do you find that with your consumers, that they're asking those questions or they appreciate that additional knowledge that you share with them?
Definitely. Yeah, for me, the major part of my marketing on Instagram is talking about ethical manufacturing and where the dresses have been made. And I do find that my customers are looking for that now, and they ask me the questions and I have the answers. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think when you put the work into your supply chain and you really dig and ask those questions with your suppliers, the really nice thing about it is that you can then go away and feed that back to your customers. Like, they want to know more than we're an ethical brand, we're a sustainable brand. Like, how are you being ethical? How are you being sustainable? How are you living those values? And this is just a little reminder that we can't do everything perfectly from day one. It's a journey. We want to focus on what our values are as a business, make sure that we don't compromise on those ethics and those values. But of course, there may be aspects that you are still developing. I'm trying to think of a good example for it. But for example, you might be using air freight, but aiming towards getting to sea freight. But if you're open about that with your customers and you can say, okay, this is what we're working towards and this is our time frame for it, you hold yourself accountable. But really, it's better that you're taking some action and moving in the right direction rather than feeling overwhelmed by the issues within the fashion industry at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember when you're starting out, especially, you can't compete with the big brands doing this who have all the money to invest, but as long as you're taking the small steps and starting out on the right foot, then that's all you can really ask.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we can focus a little bit on My Carriad, which is Emma's beautiful brand, and I'm wearing one of her dresses, and so is Emma. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you decided to get external support with your manufacturing?
Yeah, so I feel like nowadays if you're starting a brand, you really have to try and focus on ethics and sustainability within that. We can't be making bad decisions from the start now. There's no kind of excuse for it. So that was really important to me, but I'd started researching and I just found it really overwhelming. There was so much out there, and factories weren't getting back to me, and even when they were, they just wanted to know what your, minimums were, and I wasn't even at the point where I could ask them the questions about, how much they pay their staff, do they get holiday, is there good maternity, paternity leave, like all the things that I find important for me. If I was to find employment, I didn't even get round to being able to ask those questions. So I reached out to Sarah to help me because I needed someone who knew the industry and knew the right questions to ask the right people.
And would you say that's what you were most nervous about, like moving into the manufacturing world for the first time, is that unknown of like garment workers, wages, the practices, like the digging deep stuff,
exactly,
like how they organise it?
I didn't want to call myself an ethical brand and then, like you say, customers ask you the questions and I had no idea. So I needed to make sure that right from the start, I knew exactly how the treatment of the workers were, the pay, the fabrics, where they were from, as much as I could. And I just didn't find the information was readily available.
Yeah, it's quite hard when you start losing yourself in internet searches. So I really like this slide. It's a breakdown of the time that was spent when Emma and I were working together, and we spent 2.5 months in the sourcing phase, 4 months in the sampling phase, and 2 months in the production phase. And we've never really looked at this until we came to preparing this, and I think it was really interesting to see. I was responsible, as per our agreement, to do the initial sourcing. Obviously, Emma was a huge part of that because it is her business, and it has to be right for Emma. But that was like my day-to-day tasks within that process. And I have so many contacts of ethical suppliers, but it still took 2.5 months because it has to be the right supplier for that right business. And that's
because my sort of focus was going to be women, empowering women, like trying to ensure that there was like a women's focus with the manufacturers. So that was that narrowed down your searches, really, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. But it's important to know exactly what your value are, so that when I become sourcing or when you're sourcing yourself, you can really take that values first approach. Because although, yes, there's lots of manufacturers out there that are perhaps like woman-owned, or they have women in leadership, they're paying fair wage to women, it still has to meet on all sorts of levels. Like that working relationship still has to work. You have to feel comfortable working with them and building that relationship. You have to know that they can deliver on the quality that you need. So there's still a lot of initial conversations that needed to be had in the sourcing phase, which is why it took 2.5 months. And then, of course, sampling took 4 months because there's a lot of work to do in the sampling phase. You've got to make sure it's right. You're starting a brand for the first time. The product has to be fit for purpose. Quality has to be right. Fabrics, print has to be right. So that took the chunk of the time. And I would always say that probably should happen with any startup, exactly, or developing a new product. If you're not giving yourself enough time to develop it, then sacrifices could be made on that final product. And then 2 months for production, which is like quite a decent production time, to be honest. But Emma was very sensible in starting with low quantities so that you can really test the market. And I would advise that for anyone. But I think it's really interesting to see that the production time was the least amount of time in that time frame. Like the development was the biggest, but the sourcing was really crucial to making sure that the development worked and then the production went smoothly.
Yeah, and I think it's key to remember that, going for an ethical or sustainable manufacturer doesn't mean you have to wait for ages for the manufacturing to happen. Like we managed to get it done in quite a short space of time, which was great. We didn't have to go to the big factories that churn it all out. Like it was still manageable.
Yeah, and I think the scale that you started is great as well because it keeps it like flexible for you as a business.
Yes.
And then, so these are some of the important, I guess if you've done any work in ethical production, you'll know all of these points of what you want to be looking at when you start looking into ethical manufacturing. And we have like fair payment, living wages, safe and good working environments, sustainable practices and goals. There's a lot of third-party auditors that will do this work and make sure that all of these things in place. But what I would say is have those conversations with your supplier yourself. As a buyer, you really want to understand what's happening with your suppliers, and if you are just relying on a third party, yes, it's good to have that third party because they're auditing, they're doing the checks, they're the money's there. But don't be afraid of having those conversations yourself. And if you want to know a bit more about like what these actually mean in practice, the WFTO 10 Principles of Fair Trade is a great place to look, where they elaborate on their assessments, and the Ethical Trade Initiative Base Code. Again, there's lots of information online about what it means to really practice like these in fair labour. Do any of these, I mean, there was some of these that like really stood out to you?
Yeah, I would say exactly, kind of choosing almost like your top 3 like no-brainers, like things that you wouldn't like sacrifice for your brand. So yeah, for me it was, you know, gender equity, the fair payment and the living wage, which comes with, you know, regular work and fair working hours. So essentially, yeah, just the people there were treated fairly, and then that there was a woman's focus behind the manufacturers, so that I feel like it could give back.
Yeah. Okay, so this is like continuing that message, is that like keep your brand values at the forefront of your mind when you're exploring your manufacturing model and suppliers. For anyone that's thinking about starting a business, I really recommend like actually nailing down what your brand values are and allowing them to feed into all of your decisions, especially when it comes to the manufacturing model, because it helps you make really quick, informed decisions. If this supplier or if this partner or whoever you're working with, if they don't align with what you align with, for me, I just think you move away, you move on, and you find partners that do. And again, you might already have a brand, you might be in 3-5 years and you're feeling a bit lost, you don't know what to do about a certain dilemma you're in. Like, come back to your values, come back to it and think, does this decision represent my values? And really base all your decisions off that. And then you really build a value-led business, and your business really stands for who you are, what your personal values are, and you can be really proud to share it. And that's obviously something that you live by.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, have those out before you even start contacting factories, because you'll be very quick to realise whether they meet those sort of standards that you have.
Yeah.
And then it's an easy like tick box. You'd be like, no, you don't meet it. Then you can go, and then you don't waste each other's time.
Yeah, I've worked on projects with brands where they really care about women's empowerment is a big one, especially when you're working with women's fashions brands. But they were looking into a supplier, and the supplier did a lot of good work, but once you actually broke down into their audit, you could see that all of the garment workers, or like 95% of them, were women, but the leadership team was all men. And it's like, does this represent my values? Is this what I want to work with? It could be really tempting to think, yes, they can do the product, the price is right, but actually, does this manufacturer really build into my brand values? And I think it's an important stance to take. So some of the most successful partnerships I've seen between brands and suppliers are when they work towards the same goal, they've got that shared vision. I think you really want to prioritise building those trusted relationships with your suppliers. Working in partnership with your suppliers helps you tackle supply chain issues as well. There might be areas of growth for your supplier or for you as a brand, but actually when you work together to solve some of those issues, you can have the most success. So it's a two-way conversation, and it becomes a partnership rather than a simple business exchange. And doing this important work will provide you with the knowledge that you need to confidently communicate with your consumers. If you're not putting that work in with your suppliers, how can you stand up proud and talk about your business and talk about your ethics and your values with your customers if you're not doing the work yourself?
Yeah.
This is just like a simple example of how that plays, and we've already touched on it. If your brand value is women's empowerment, and we're seeing in the supply chain women are perhaps being exploited rather than empowered, you're not living by those values. So it's just a simple exercise that I do with all my clients before we start working on any project, is looking at what your values are. So what does it mean for the supply chain that you want to take for your business? And again, looking at Emma, what was really interesting about what we did is, whenever we do a sourcing project, usually you'll narrow it down to a few really great suppliers that are doing really positive work. And the brand, especially in the startup phase, will choose one of those suppliers and they'll move it forward, but they'll keep in contact with the other suppliers for when they grow. We found 2 fantastic suppliers for Emma, and Emma actually decided to go with both of them.
Yeah.
for her first collection and split the collection between 2 suppliers. And I think it was really interesting because one of them is based overseas and one of them is in the UK, which I think is super interesting. So do you want to talk a bit about why you decided to do that?
Yeah, I think they both really aligned with what I wanted to achieve, and so essentially I couldn't really decide, and I thought it would be great to almost compare getting it manufactured in the UK versus in India, you know, on a myriad of things like being able to get samples quicker, or, you know, different skill sets, because I found that my manufacturer in India could do the sort of shearing on the sleeves, which my UK one couldn't, but obviously I could actually visit my UK factory to go and do the fittings and the samples, so that process took a lot shorter time, and then, you know, you didn't have the shipping and the customs and stuff, but, you know, it was amazing to see some Indian craftsmanship, and I really loved them because they employed women with speech and language difficulties, and that was like a really lovely aspect to their business model, and they had a high level of women within their industry, and so I just thought it'd be interesting to try both and see how it kind of came out, really. And as I'm now almost a year into selling to the public, I found really the only difficulty was marketing it, because, you know, if you say it's made in the UK, everyone's like, oh, it's made in the UK, but not everyone reads all of your Instagram posts, so they might see the one that's made in the UK and then assume that that's who I am. So I have to be really, like, consistent with my conversations about saying that I do both. But aside from that, I really enjoyed working with both from different places.
Yeah,
they bought
do you think
different
that
things.
was like quite an unexpected thing that came out of it? Like,
Yeah, I think so.
marketing?
Yeah, 'cause especially, you know, I think there was a lot of concern with, you know, shipping, customs, things getting lost or whatever, and I didn't happen to have those, and so yeah, I was, and same with like cost differences. I didn't find there to be a huge difference, so it was quite surprising, yeah, that I found both worked equally as well for me in that process.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, there really wasn't a big cost difference.
No.
Even though you might assume that there would be, and there
Yes.
wasn't. And it's because you worked with a really small, sustainable based supplier in India where they only work with slow fashion brands. And it's one of the unique suppliers that I found that actually don't have a minimum order quantity, but they have a maximum order quantity, and you
Yeah.
can't order over so many because their priority is keeping it small. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting approach that you took across, and it's always good to refer back to it. But yeah, so how to source the right manufacturers. These are just some tips that I find really useful. Be prepared, know what you want. This will show the manufacturers that you are serious. Often when I work with brands, they perhaps start sourcing a little bit too early before they really know what they want, and a manufacturer's, especially if you're starting small, usually what they do is very specific, so you want to understand what you need so that you're having the right conversations, and it doesn't, the worst thing is that you feel like you're emailing 20, 30, 40 manufacturers and you're only getting like 5 replies. It can feel quite draining, so once you get really specific on what you need, or at least a clear vision, you can start speaking to the right people and have better conversations. Having some images ready, I mean, it sounds simple, but it really helps. Having a visual helps move the conversation forward. Keeping on top of your conversations, I mean, we all manage multiple conversations in whatever we do, like email, phones, WhatsApps, whatever, but I find on a sourcing project, if you have one place where you can reference everything, so I can make sure I know exactly who was the last person to contact who within the sourcing process, how I feel about the communication. Is it flowing naturally? Do I have to follow up every few days to get a response? What's going on? What certifications do they have? Have all my minimum criteria, and then I have this one place where I can assess everyone I'm speaking to and think, these are the right people for me. They meet X, Y, and Z, and the conversation's great. I feel like it's a positive partnership to move forward with. Be willing to walk away if the values don't align. I think this is so important. I've worked on a project recently, and we've been working with a supplier. This isn't with Emma, but we've been working with a supplier for over a year, and they can do the product, they can do the price point, all of the ethics and the sustainable goals are in place, but there's a real issue with sexism, to be honest, and it's a woman-owned business, I'm a woman, and it's become so much of a struggle that we've actually just walked away from the supplier because it doesn't align with what that brand values are, and we don't have to put up with that relationship just because they can meet the product. So I really think focusing on your values and walking away if it doesn't work.
Yeah, because there are plenty out there. You know, there is plenty of options out there, so don't settle.
Yeah, they really are. Now, it might take a lot of time to get there, but when you get the best partnership and you can really build together, then it's a really nice place to be. Knowing your target price, but keep an open mind. The reality of the costs of manufacturing are what they are, and you have to do a bit of research to get close to that. But if you have a target price in mind, it helps you navigate the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I had to come up on my price by quite a lot than what I expected. And again, that was because that was like on my key sort of values. That was a lot lower than being, you know, women-led and making sure that they were paying fairly. Like our factory in India sent us their wages for all their staff, their holidays, like everything that they offer. And so for me, it was more important that I sold it at the right price with the right people.
Yeah.
And that was the sacrifice I was willing to make.
Yeah. And it works.
It did.
It really works. And knowing your non-negotiables. So again, it's like coming back to that, like where are you willing to compromise and where are you not willing to compromise? You might not be willing to compromise on certain certifications, certain values, a living wage, but you might be willing to compromise on location, or can't think of another one, but just knowing what's important to you and where you're a bit more flexible, I think is really important, so that again, quick informed decisions, you can just focus the search in the right direction. This is just a bit of a few places that you can start looking to source suppliers if that's what you're looking to do. Obviously, trade shows are fantastic. You can meet, there's obviously suppliers next door. You can meet suppliers and have those direct conversations straight away, and you really get answers straight away, like minimum order quantities. You can talk about certifications. So it's a great place to start meeting people, and then you can carry on the conversation however. WFTO share all of their suppliers, networking groups, common objective is fantastic. Searching online, just be patient, make it British. Other brands, transparency is increasing all the time, and I think it's important to, like see where other people are manufacturing. Not copying, of course, but like just having, I like that we can come together in the world of ethical and sustainable fashion. It's about community, it's not about competition. So looking at who else is manufacturing with supplies that could be useful, or getting professional support, which is what I do. When you start exploring ethical practices when sourcing, these are just some like intro things that you can start to do, like the very first level stuff. Doing your research, which certifications or memberships are they a part of? Always get up-to-date signed copy of these. Like I've worked with suppliers where they've had fair trade certifications online, but they're actually about 2 or 3 years expired. And it probably doesn't mean that they've changed how they're working in any way, but they might not just had the finances to keep these up to date. But you really need to know if they're actually certified before you then put out to your customers. Reviewing audits, like it's always really good to get a copy of an audit, ask the right questions. Again, look who else is buying from them. And I think the most important one is having an open conversation, ask the questions. Ask questions about their business practices. You get a bit of a green flag, red flag.
Yeah, because if they're not forthcoming with the information, then, it's no skin off their nose to supply you with that information. So if they don't want to bring it, perhaps it's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, body language is very important as well when you're on a Zoom or whatever, or face-to-face. If people sort of close off and they don't want to talk about that, I mean, there could be other reasons, but for me, I'm always looking out for that thing. And it's something we did at the very beginning, isn't it? You were very much part of that process in meeting people and making sure that you could have those conversations with them directly as well.
Yeah, and I found the Indian manufacturer especially brought suggestions to me to how to make it more sustainable, what fabrics I could use to make it better for my brand, how to export it in a more sustainable way. Like they offered loads of suggestions. So if you feel like they're coming to you with a way to make it better, then that's a good sign.
Yes, definitely. These are some direct questions that you can ask when you're wanting to explore the ethics with the manufacturer. I've seen brands ask questions like, are you ethical, or I really want to work with an ethical brand. I think it's important to get specific with what you want to be asking. So, do you offer any employment benefits? Do you allow full factory visits? How are wages agreed? Ask the specific questions, and then you get much more information.
Yeah, because I have asked that question, are you ethical? And they just go, yeah, and then shut it down.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, you can't really ask much more than that, so then you just feel a bit stuck. So,
But
it's open questions.
Yeah, and they could totally, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not as
No.
well, but it just means, like, maybe they're busy and it's their day-to-day, and they're just like, yeah, we are, like, come and work with us. But actually, without you asking specific questions, you don't have the real information to then go away and, again, know for your own business, but also share and making sure that things are, that the partnership is the partnership that you want for your business. And yeah, lastly, I think transparency is the key to everything. It's a process, it's a journey. I think avoid relying on those vague terms like ethical, like sustainable. Yes, we use them because that's the language that's out there, but actually show people what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're not really, like where you're aiming to improve, and a bit of a time frame on that, and just keep that conversation open and honest with the consumers, because that's really, I mean, that's what I appreciate as a consumer, and that's what loads of us appreciate. I mean, I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I think it's just the best approach. So I think transparency is absolutely key in this age where we're all learning, we're all looking to improve the industry.
That's it. It's already happening, isn't it? It's already, you see with so many brands talking about where their fabrics are from, who's making their clothes, you know, people are talking about it. So it's becoming more important to all brands.
Yeah.
And if you can get in there and do it from the start, or, you know, talk about it moving into that kind of realm, then, you know, people will love it.
Yes, absolutely. So a bit of a recap. Don't rush the sourcing process. The right suppliers for your business do exist. They absolutely do. Pay attention to the values from the beginning. Do they align? Investigate the full supply chain and build positive partnerships with your suppliers. So I have a free production planner on my website. So if anyone wants a copy of that, you can head to my website, which is on the next slide, but you can head to my website and you can get a free editable document that you can manage your own production with, and it helps you plan ahead as well. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to us today. If you've got any questions, let us know, but we'll also be heading over to the sustainability corner. But yeah, if you've got any questions for us now as well, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.